discussion items, I'd like to go ahead and go with item number one, it's the liability and property insurance renewal. And with that, Mr. McKinney, would you like to offer comments and present to us, please?
Well, folks, I wish I had better news than we had this year. It's been a pretty challenging year in the insurance business, particularly for coastal property. It seems like a number of insurers have decided to withdraw from the marketplace for various reasons, primarily because they've had a challenge making what they consider to be a reasonable profit in the past due to the catastrophes we've had, both hurricanes and fires and fortunately, we were with a company, Ace American, that's a very strong, large company that's maintained a presence in the coastal marketplace for a number of years. They came back with a 15% increase in the property insurance, and we pushed back as hard as we could to try to get them to lighten up on that a little bit. Actually, it was 16.4%, and we were successful in getting them to back off last year. They asked for a similar increase last year, and we got them to reduce it. And, but this year we were not successful, and as the memo says, we've seen price increases in the range of 10 to 40% on coastal property for the last 6 months or so. We've had a number of larger accounts that we've shopped extensively and only had one insurer willing to offer a quote. It's been a long time since I've seen the market be that restricted. The rest of the program, the liability package, which is with Travelers Insurance Company, increased 9%. That's pretty much in line with what we've seen in liability increases over the past several months. The cyber liability took a big increase, and that was due to the increase in frequency and severity of cyber attacks that have occurred over the past year and a half or so. We made some changes in the protocols for the insurer recommended some changes in protocols for the commission on their remote access, where it would be multi-factor authentication, which is pretty much required by all the cyber liability insurers now. So we were able to do that, and had we not done that, wouldn't.
A week and a half.
Yeah, right. Had we not done that, we might not have gotten a renewal quote. So at the end of the day, we're up 15.5% from last year. Coverages are the same pretty much across the board as they were. The one thing I did want to mention is the commission had an appraisal done by a professional appraisal outfit, CBiz, in 2015 that came in and looked at all the water treatment facilities. We didn't have them look at the distributed lift stations, et cetera. They made that appraisal in 2015. We updated the values 3% across the board in 2019. It probably would be a good idea to ask CBiz or some other company to look at a revised replacement cost estimate. With what's happened in the construction industry, I'm sure y'all are well aware of the increase in costs that's happened over the last year or so. The probability is our values are below what they ought to be based on current costs to rebuild. And we may have some facilities on there too that have no longer used that might come off the schedule. CBiz, I think, would be my suggestion to talk to first, because they could probably come in. They've already done the field work. They've got the They've measured all the buildings. They have the construction features of all the buildings, so it'd be a matter of just updating their cost schedule and then adding on any new structures that have been built since 2015. That's a recommendation. It's not mandatory. It's just a suggestion, something for the board to consider.
I don't know the answer to that question.
No, sir.
So is this policy an umbrella policy to
No,
that point, or is it?
It's a property insurance. So
It's not, I mean, when I say umbrella, I mean, is it all the,
it's scheduled, we got a list of items that are covered in a limit of coverage for each item. It's not a blanket policy, so
Okay.
we don't have movable insurance. And it's, the total schedule on the policy was about 89 million. And we've got a $10 million cap. So in other words, any claim over $10 million, we're out of coverage. But the idea is we've got 3 locations. Most of your structures are pretty well storm resistant to catastrophic damage. They could have some,
so we got a $10 million cap, tax tag and title,
that's it, yeah.
on property.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And flood. Yes, sir. I can get it to you. Our servers are down at my office, so I don't know if I can get it to you this afternoon, but as soon as the server's up, I can send it to Pam or Janice, and she can.
So,
CBiz. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Right. Right. They, the reason we didn't do the appraisal on the lift stations was the idea was that they were being built on a kind of ongoing basis, so I kind of had an idea of what the costs were there, and you could interpolate that, whereas with the treatment plants in this building and the other facilities, obviously they hadn't been built for a long time, and nobody felt comfortable putting a value on them.
so, Fred, I guess what jumps out at me is, and I don't know much about the insurance industry, obviously, but I mean, we're basically paying $303,000 a year for the property piece for $10 million coverage. That's 3%.
Yep.
So, they're basically mathematically, we're saying we're going to have total loss every 33 years. I mean, not counting. I mean, it's just simple linear,
Yep.
linear calculation, not counting.
You're saying you're going to have a $10 million loss every.
Well, I mean,
10
yeah.
years.
Well, which is, yes, I mean, total loss of the policy value
Right,
is what I meant.
right.
So, I mean, just to me, seems out of skew.
What's your total limit of coverage?
10 million, he said.
90 million in values, yeah.
So you get a big upfront primary factor for the 10 million that you actually have insured against the $90 million schedule, because the relative linear equation would say that the 10 million that you're actually insuring against the 90 million exposed, there's a lot larger likelihood of using up that $10 million limit versus buying a whole limit of 90 million. So you do get a large factor on the front end for that, what we call primary layer.
Okay. So I get that. That makes sense.
Sorry.
No, I mean, that makes sense. I appreciate explaining it, but it just seems,
It's a lot more than the hospital pays on a rate per dollar of coverage, and hospitals probably have the lowest rates you can get for property because they're generally well constructed, as your stuff is, a lot of
appreciate
it.
you saying that, by the way.
Yeah. And also, it's all sprinklered, and it's 24-hour
Sure.
security, et cetera, et cetera. So hospitals, from a property insurance standpoint, are probably at the very low end of the scale. Y'all are a couple, 3 notches above where a hospital is. And part of the challenge for us is finding somebody that's got the ability and the willingness to put out a $10 million limit on a property that's located in a first-tier coastal county.
Well, Fred, since we jumped into our discussion, I'll go ahead and ask a question here. For the coverage we have, is there anything that we should do differently in the management of our facilities or the construction of the facilities that would improve the coverage, change the risk profile?
No, sir. There's, you know, the construction of the facilities, with the exception of these office buildings, they're all pretty much reinforced concrete. There's a few pre-engineered metal buildings out there, but they're relatively small in terms of the relative value to the whole schedule. So the big values are all, and you know, we've made the argument to the underwriters. We've brought them out here, and we even, years ago, I even tried to separate the values between reinforced concrete structure and then machinery and equipment, which your machinery and equipment also is pretty well indestructible for the most part. I mean, it's subject to fire damage possibly, or storm surge on some motors, but as far as the bulk of the equipment value, it's, you know, pretty much indestructible steel.
So
Go ahead.
to that end, this equipment floater, I was thinking equipment when I read it, thinking like track hose, backhoes, stuff like that. But then you said pumps and motors and stuff. Is this equipment at the plant, or is this mobile equipment?
That's mobile equipment. The
Okay.
equipment floaters for backhoes and
I
stuff
got you.
like
So
that.
it is.
Right.
What kind of coverage we have there?
We schedule the vehicles. Each one of the items of the larger items are scheduled, and the values assigned to them for the replacement, or not replacement cost, actual cash value.
So it's individual.
Yes, sir.
I got you.
Okay, so to get back to the question, in terms of design and operations, you don't have a recommendation that would improve our risk profile?
No, sir. I think y'all are for me personally, looking at what you have, it's well-managed properties. They're well-maintained, and they're well-constructed. I mean, it's hard to make any kind of recommendation that would have any kind of economic sense to improve the risk profile for your property.
Okay. And in regards to the other coverage types, the question again is there any other way that we need to improve our risk profile on those segments of the coverage? Whether it be liability, the cyber we touched on.
We've been pretty fortunate from a general liability standpoint. We've had a few minor little claims here and there. Automobile, McGinney Gordon is now part of a much bigger organization, and we've got some resources for risk management and loss control that we didn't have previously. So we could make some training and risk control talent available to the commission without additional charge, if that was something that y'all would be interested in entertaining, for like training, automobile safe driver training, and those kind of things. So I'm happy to get with Andrew and make that available to him.
Okay. Any other comments or questions before we move to the motion? Okay, hearing none, the chair will entertain a motion.
All right, I'll move that the Finance Committee recommend that the full commission approve insurance renewal rates for each coverage category and insurer as listed in the attached memo provided by the staff.
I'll second it to go to the full commission.
Oh, to go to the full commission, recommend.
Motion and second. Any discussion, questions, please? Hearing none, all those in favor? Okay, carries.
Thank y'all.
Thank you, Fred.
Thank you, Fred.
So we have the item 2 minutes from the February 16th meeting.
Make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
I was absent for that, so I'll abstain. I'll second the motion, but
Thank you, Commissioner. We have a motion and a second. Hearing no other comments, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor? Carries with one abstention.
yes. I wasn't here, so.
Right. Item 3, declaration of surplus vehicle. Andrew?
Yes, sir. We have a 2005 Ford Explorer that has been housed in our water production division. It's got some significant maintenance issues, and the vehicle was replaced with a new vehicle that was recently received. So now the new vehicle is in service. The request here is to declare this 2005 Ford Explorer with 160,000 miles on it as surplus property. we'll put it on Gov Deals. Somebody may buy it for parts.
What's it worth in the insurance market? I'm just kidding. I'll move that the Brunswick-Glynn County Joint Water and Sewer Commission approve the above listed item as surplus to be disposed of in a manner most beneficial to Joint Water and Sewer Commission.
I'll second the motion.
Comments or questions regarding the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Passes 3-0, thank you. Item 4, appointment of auditor. Andrew?
Yes, sir. Back in 2021, we went out for proposals for auditing services. The firm that scored the highest was Malden and Jenkins, and they gave us a proposal for 1 year and 2 option years. This would be the final and second option year for the proposal. So the request is to award that option year to Malden and Jenkins to perform our fiscal year 2022 audit for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2022. Costs $19,900.
Okay, the chair will entertain a motion.
Wait, so it ends,
Fiscal
Okay.
year ends in June, and then
Okay, I'm
they'll
with
do
you.
the
Yeah,
audit,
yeah.
usually in September.
yep, I'm with you.
We start working on it in June.
Yeah, ending June threw me off, but I'm with you. You're right. I move that the Finance Committee recommend to the full commission that Joint Water Sewer Commission engage the accounting firm of Malden Jenkins to perform the financial audit of the JWSC for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2022 at a cost of $19,000.
19,900.
I'm sorry, $19,900.
And I'll second the motion.
A motion is second. Comments or questions, please?
I do have a question. Isn't it kind of standard procedure to change auditors every so many years?
Typically, we used to do that. We rotated every 3 years. And when we went out in 2021 for auditing services, they were the only person that submitted the RFP at that time. So we awarded to them. We've been very pleased with Malden and Jenkins' work. But what we were told at the time was firms were pretty busy and weren't trying to look on any new work at the time. So we didn't get any more proposals. We'll go back out for next year's audit and potentially get a new firm at that time, should anybody be interested.
Well, that's what threw me off when you said next year's audit. That's what threw me off.
I think this is the first of the 2 years.
Well, my apologies.
Yeah, that's what threw me off a second ago when I said, wait now, but
My apologies.
pretty good.
The auditors do rotate associates who come down, so it's not the same group of people for 6
Right.
years in a row.
Yeah, that's necessary because the relationship has to stay,
Impartial.
yes.
And we don't have to exercise next year's option.
We do not have to.
Right.
We could go back out at that time,
Yeah.
if we so choose.
Maybe that's a discussion we need to have earlier in the year.
Obviously, if we're gonna award the audit in March or April, we need to make sure we have that discussion in the fall so we can go back out for
So
services.
if you decide to go out for bid, yeah.
Why don't you bring it up for discussion in the fall? Not that we don't necessarily want to do this, but that way we can at least all
Sure.
discuss it and not wait till
Absolutely.
it's option time.
Other questions or comments before I call the question, please? Hearing none, all those in favor? Motion carries. Capital improvement fee. Andrew, you're gonna talk to us about a connection assistance policy.
Yes, sir. This is something that we've been talking about for a while, but with the upcoming ARCO project kicking off in 2 weeks, this is something that we probably need to move forward with if possible. Essentially, this policy and the official policy and the wording there is there for your review. The purpose of this is to allow a cost-effective method for existing homes that currently are not on the water and sewer systems to be able to get onto those systems when the public systems are available. Again, we talked about this with ARCO. We're fixing to extend public sewer access to approximately 400 properties. And we want to make sure that those residents out there have access to that sewer system. But this also would apply to existing structures that are on septic tanks that have access to the current water and sewer systems. But when their septic tank fails, they may decide to get on our system if there's this policy or similar things may come into play. So the policy applies to existing structures that are not connected to the JWSC-owned water and sewer systems. And the proposal is to allow them to finance the cost of the capital improvement fee and operational charges. So on a water account, a water and sewer combined account, the operational charges includes the cost of the meter and installation of the meter. There are inspection fees for water and sewer and the actual capital improvement portion of that fee. The account charges for the starting of the account and the deposit are not eligible for the financing. It's only available for new structures, new construction, for existing structures. New construction projects would not be allowed to finance the connection fees. And a lot of that simply because they turn those properties over and you have a new property owner involved shortly after it gets under construction. And then we've got a lot of administrative burden on the back end. So it's only available to the water and sewer account holder. So the way we would propose to do this is actually add a line item to your monthly water and sewer bill for the amount. And if we do not have, if we have a different financer and water and sewer account holder, then that becomes problematic. So if somebody's on the system and they fail to pay the full amount of the water and sewer bill plus the finance charge on well, that could result in disconnection of services. But we obviously wouldn't want to disconnect services to somebody because the property owner didn't pay their portion of the bill and the resident or the lessee paid their water bill. It complicates things. So here's some proposed interest rates. This is based off of our cost of money and here in the system and what we can get returns on investing the things. So it goes up the more years you finance it, obviously. So starting at 2% if you finance it up to 3 years and all the way to 20 years at 4.5% interest. And then, I don't know, that may not be large enough and I apologize, but here's some estimated monthly payments if somebody were to go about doing this.
What's the principal?
Right here on the left. See amount?
Oh, yeah, okay. I can't see it that far.
Yeah. $3,500 if you're a combined 5/8 inch water and sewer customer. In the ARCO area, for example, most of those customers are on the water system, so they would be a sewer-only new connection. So that sewer-only new connection, so in the ARCO area would be the $1,965. If they finance that for 3 years at that rate, their monthly payment would be $56.28. And I say estimated because obviously the cost of meters and materials can change. So these numbers will change every year, theoretically. Not much, but they will change some. So if we have a customer who only wants to finance for 3 years out there in ARCO and they're already on the water system, they get their monthly water and sewer bill, let's say $60 for the monthly water and sewer bill, and then there'd be a $56 charge associated with that each month that they'd have to pay for a combined water and sewer bill of, say, $115. If you want to finance it out to 20 years, of course, you're going to be paying a higher interest rate, but a much lower monthly payment, so that customer would elect into that, and they would pay $12.43 a month in addition to their water and sewer bill, usage bill. Now, a couple of caveats, it's not in the presentation, but if you read through the policy, we would be filing liens on the property for the full amount remaining of the finance amount, so that if the property is sold, that the lien would have to be fulfilled prior to that, so we don't end up transferring the financing amount to a new account holder. You would be able to pay these off early if you so choose, no prepayment penalty to do that. But there's really no way in the system that would allow them to, say, round up to $57 each month, because there's no way to apply those payments to the individual line items. So it would just be the total bill. So if you rounded up that 72 cents, that would just show up as a credit towards your next month bill for 72 cents. So there's no way to do a principal-only payment on that, like you may do with your mortgage. So obviously, customers, if they want to, can still come in and pay the full amount up front, and that's their own endeavor to do that. But we wanted to give them an option to do that if they so chose. We would update the lien amount each year based off the remaining balance and go from there. So the financing charge, one, is because obviously there's risk involved with us doing this, but also to help recoup the administrative cost associated with maintaining the program.
I have a question. So if you have a customer that currently has water and you're going to be adding sewer, will they be required to have an additional deposit when they do that, or the deposit they have is?
Deposit they have is sufficient for water or sewer, so they would just pay the capital improvement fee and the charge for the clean-out inspection.
Of course, then they would have the other charges from a contractor
Yes,
connecting.
this does not cover running from the property line to the house or connecting anything in the house. When we stub out, say in ARCO, there'll be stub outs at every property line. They've got to hire a utility contractor to bring it to them. But this will allow them to finance the portion of the tap associated with that.
So, I mean, we're talking ARCO primarily, right?
ARCO is the main driver for doing it this month because the project's fixing to kick off, but we have an abundance of properties currently that are within 500 feet of a public water and sewer system that have failing tanks, and then they're having problems fronting the money to us to get on the system. So this could potentially impact hundreds of customers.
So, and the purpose of the question is just trying to, I mean, cause this is a lot of options here. I mean, the bulk of these customers, are they gonna be getting 5/8 inch meters or 1 inch meters?
5/8. The overwhelming majority of them will be getting 5/8 inch meters.
Kinda where I was headed with it. I was thinking the overwhelming majority are gonna be getting 5/8 inch meters. What are the majority of them be getting? Sewer only, water only, or both?
Most of them will be sewer only because most of these customers are already on the water system, but there could be, of course, options for both.
Okay.
I think directionally, it's where we need to go to facilitate some customers that would have great difficulty coming up with this much capital, whether it's the sewer only, for example, it's nearly $2,000. Some folks would have great difficulty being able to do that, plus whatever the plumber charges.
Right. So they could use that $2,000 of capital to get a plumber to put their lateral in.
Very much so, and the financing, I think, is reasonable. I don't particularly care for the beyond 10-year option there.
Sure.
Because statistically, folks don't stay in their house 20 years. When you look at the entire homeowners, Georgia-wide only, for that matter. But
Well, and that's exactly where I was headed with my question, Bob, is, I mean, the beyond 10 years, I mean, you're not really, if you're talking mainly sewer only, mainly at the 5/8 inch meter size, you're talking the difference of $7 in the monthly payment, and you're tying somebody's hand for another 10 years. I mean, so they end up paying a lot more because of the whole full point on insurance. I mean, not insurance.
Yeah, you were correct. Yeah, I mean, certainly it can be modified to cap it at 10 years. I was just giving them as many options as we could.
again, directionally, I think this is very good. It provides an option for customers to connect that's affordable. It doesn't cause a big impact to their capital on their property. And I would just, my thoughts are is to cut the financing down to a 10-year period, because I think at one time I read that 7 years was average.
Right.
Home ownership, and we wouldn't allow it to be transferred to the next one
Right.
anyway. So keep it within 10, and I think I read in here that the rate would vary based on market conditions on an annual basis.
That's correct.
That's reasonable because we're bearing that risk to service the debt for a period of time, and it's reasonable for us to recover our administrative costs. So overall, I think the policy is sound, and I would be certainly supportive of it. Other thoughts?
Remind me how ARCO is paid for?
ARCO is paid for from the bond issuance.
And what's our rate of the bond issuance?
2.
2%.
I've got a question. ARCO is put in the sewer, and this sewer tap is being put in by the contractor. It's employed by us. So to encourage, I mean, that's a big area. And I don't know, have you considered if they hook up to it within 2 years, they're on the pay account? Because it's employed and paid. To encourage everybody to hook up real quick, and then after that, complaints. And have this financing deal set up for people who are close to a sewer who might want, where a tap actually has to be installed.
My response would be, we're working with Glynn County now to try to get CDBG funding to help customers get connected immediately,
That's for their connection, that's for the house service, right?
and potentially to refund our connection fees.
But if you don't get that, then the ones that might not qualify, some of them might qualify.
Yes, absolutely possible.
But then you gotta hook up right then. That way we can get revenue from it for a year, or it came before this.
But this is just part of the equation, because then they have to have the hookup from a sewer contractor to do that.
Yeah, we'll stub out to the right of way on all these locations.
Yeah.
Agree, they don't have to pay a tap fee, because tap fees is included in the
Well, the tap fee is to provide for system-wide expansion. It's not necessarily just to pay for
Right.
that expansion in their neighborhood.
What do other utilities do? Is this modeled on what?
Yeah, I found a couple of other utilities that did something similar to this. Some utilities offer financing, some utilities offer, based off of income verification, a percentage off on the tap. We are trying to avoid having to get into income verification because that is a whole nother ball of wax to get involved with.
My challenge, and I get that it's not our problem, I'll say that, I understand that, but my challenge with this is, to me, there's a difference between a new home who has the option of putting a $15,000 septic tank in or tying into our system. But these people have already sunk the cost in a septic tank years ago. And, you know, if it's failing and they have no choice, that's one thing, but I mean, I don't see this as a big enticer to say, well, I mean, let's quit paying our, you know, let's quit maintaining our septic tank system, which is essentially nothing, and start, you know, paying a monthly sewer bill. And it is, you know, with public health, it is good to get people off septic tanks, especially in these small communities where the septic tanks probably don't meet code. They're probably, some of them probably draining in the marsh, some of them are, you know, probably draining it into the neighbor's well. I mean, it makes sense to me to get people off of, you know, the communities off of sewer, I mean, off of private sewer and onto public sewer. And I just see this as a big deterrent.
If they connect by the first 2 years, it's great.
When do we decide when that 2-year period starts? When do we decide when that 2-year period starts? When the pipe's in front of their house or when the full project's over? Well, when they're ready to be connected, so that technically that 2-year period is different for every street.
Yeah, let me offer this kind of, we've got some great ideas here. But though, in my view, those aren't on the table at this point because they're not well, they're not ferreted out with all the various details. While ARCO is our first significant area to expand in, we're just offering an option. To Commissioner Stevens' point, it may not be a big enough carrot to offer financing for folks to make the change, but they will have to make the change at some point. Everybody's septic tank is going to reach an end of life at some point. My thoughts here is that we have a financing option. It is not the only option to facilitate acquiring new customers, like in ARCO or anywhere, whether it's Bell Point or some other location. Beverly Shores is another one. Some areas that we don't serve all of it. But it's just one way to move us closer to providing more options for potential customers.
Well, to that point, if we wanted to do something for the projects like ARCO or Beverly Shores or something like that, whenever we get to these areas, you could have special district policies for those individual projects that we could say, you have them, you know, ARCO project ended January 1st, 2023.
Yep.
You have 2 years in that area. We have a lot of customers that we're not running lines to, the lines in front of their house already, that could take advantage of this type policy as well.
Go back to slide one more time. Jumps out at me too, this is a little off subject, but it jumps out at me that the 1-inch water line is that much more expensive than the 5/8 inch line. I remember when we did that, I think we wanted to discount the value to 5/8 because we, wanted
It's based off of the maximum flow through the meter. The 1-inch water line was set by the rate study that was done about 5 years ago. And then it's based off of, when we changed the charging based off of meter size versus RAU capacity, it's based off the maximum flow rate through a 5/8 inch meter versus a 1-inch meter.
I bet, I understand that, but, and again, it's linear, based off of, like you said, the max flow, but I'd argue that the monthly usage probably isn't linear.
No, 1-inch and a 5/8 inch meter, there's not a tremendous difference. The difference is obviously multi-story houses typically get 1-inch meters.
Right. So, it's not necessarily that, they're using more water necessarily. Probably a little bit more because it probably is a slightly bigger house, but they're probably not using twice as much. And that sewage amount is, way up there compared to the.
Well, we've got several interesting comments and perhaps some things that we can follow up on as be our capital fee. Look at that again and some other options. So what I'd like to do is see if we have interest in a motion to move this particular option to the full commission. And so the chair will entertain a motion if there is an interest for it.
I'd like to discuss it more before we approve it personally. I mean, I don't know what kind of hurry we are to approve it. I don't see why it's gotta be this month versus next. You know,
Yeah,
I love the program. I like the idea. I like the concept. Sounds like we need some tweaking, maybe even to, the chair's comment, the chair of this committee's comment is, he'd like to cap it at 10 years. I certainly agree with that. I'd hate to see somebody finance, something for 20 years at $9 a month. They're really just paying extra interest at that point. I mean, the principal, they're not really paying much extra principal. They're just paying a lot of extra interest.
That's true.
Not paying. So, I personally like to discuss it more before we.
The question we have is, two dollars, some, lower interest rate, especially the first few years.
Okay. That can be looked at.
Okay.
The reality is we're trying to, and I realize that we're prolonging this discussion, but frankly, that's why we have a committee meeting instead of the whole.
No, I agree. I mean,
Instead of having it at the whole, commission level. But, I mean, I'm tending to agree with Commissioner Turner, or Chair Turner's, statement too. I mean, we're trying to get people on this. That's the whole point. We've already got sunk costs whether they use it or not.
yes.
We've got sunk costs whether they use it or not. We're not getting any revenue off of it if they're not using it. We need to get them on it for public health and in order to generate revenue and in order to just, use our capacity. I mean, I like the idea of having a much lower rate at the bottom, almost like a 90 days, same as cash, but not 90 days, obviously. But, get it paid off quickly, you don't have to pay interest and then, lower those interest rates some, and then cap it, at 10 years.
Okay.
That's just my comments.
I'm not ready to move forward with it either. I think we need
Okay.
a lot more information.
Then lacking a motion, this issue dies for this meeting. It's good
We
discussion.
need a motion, right, to defer or table?
I just recommend we table this or, discuss, have it as a discussion item maybe for tomorrow, and then let's continue to discuss it at facilities, finance, et cetera. I mean, I don't want it to die by any means. I just don't want to approve it today.
Understand?
I question whether we need to discuss it tomorrow.
I think my personal opinion would bring it back for the finance committee for further discussion in April.
Yeah, more information.
Well, the only reason, I disagree simply because maybe just a quick update tomorrow, maybe even it can come from Bob just to say, hey, this was discussed yesterday, we deferred to pending stuff, but I think we owe it to, especially knowing that the county representative and the city representative are here today. I think it'd be nice for them to kind of hear at least high level what we talked about, at least a recap of what we talked about, not necessarily for a full discussion.
Right, sure.
That's just my thought.
All very good thoughts, and I appreciate the lead on that, Commissioner. Okay, so we have an item here. I'll suggest the motion is that we defer this one until the meeting of April or review again by the Finance Committee. So,
That's fine.
okay, all those in favor? Okay, that'll pass. We'll defer to April's meeting. And to be clear, Andrew, to offer my thoughts about expectations, if we could modulate the numbers to where we look at the term.
Sure.
The interest rate was the other, and then maybe we have a menu list of items, some that Chairman Turnipseed offered, and then we can ferret those things out again as to, and what's the impact for us if,
Right.
where we choose various options.
Okay.
Certainly, Commissioner Turnipseed's comment about the maybe even having a free window,
Okay.
or reduced window, nothing else.
Sure.
To get people to sign up, more quickly.
Especially these areas we're doing expansion. I mean, maybe not in existing areas that have been there for 20 years, but I mean, areas, or maybe we give them a grace period too.
Maybe the neighbors can get together and get a better rate on the installation of their, from their sewer contractor.
Having multiple people involved getting them connected would certainly lower the cost
I
to
would think so.
the homeowner.
They're bringing the equipment.
Certainly lower the cost to the homeowner, based off of the quotes I've been seeing recently.
Okay, let's move to discussion items. Item one is the draft of the 2023 annual budget.
All right. There's a 20-page packet there that I will not be going through all 20 pages of that, plus the budget. So we had 4 goals going into this budget year. We want to try to maintain affordability despite, as we've talked about in multiple meetings, costs are rising in the construction, in chemicals, and in general services at this point. We wanted to increase our project funding to maintain the master plan. If you recall, when we endorsed the master plan, we want to maintain that project funding we've got and increase that so we can keep up with that. That project fund is, master plan is a little front-loaded. We want to improve our equipment reliability. You'll see a long list of capital requests in there, and that is because of the need to improve our reliability there. And we also are always looking to streamline our operational processes. So some highlights. This is for discussion, not for approval today, but the highlights of the budget is I will be requesting a water-only rate adjustment to fund an increase in the budget. That does come along with funding increase for the repair and replacement reserve, which we use for projects. We talked about the capital cost to improve equipment reliability, but one benefit, the new SCADA system is paying benefits, and also some other areas we've seen some reductions. We're having a pretty substantial budgeted overtime reduction. I think the budgeted overtime cumulative is down about $90,000. So here's kind of a snapshot of your budgeted revenues. Obviously, this is not the details that is in your packet, but about 41% of the budgeted revenues would come from sewer charges. Water revenues would be about 21%, 13% from debt charges, a little under 19% for the administrative charges, and then the items labeled other income on the standard financial reports is about 5%, and then a little bit of interest from our reserve investments, and then planning and construction charges fees for reviews, and they do charge fees, but it doesn't amount to a significant amount of money at the end of the year, so that is a very small sliver on there.
Those administrative fees, that's the administrative fee that's on the actual bill.
On the bill, that's correct. So revenue highlights, we have seen an increase in customer count. I looked back and did some digging. We've added close to 3,000 customer accounts in the past 3 to 5 years. So we're seeing a growth in customer accounts. With that increases our revenue projection. So the water revenue increase that is projected in the budget will require a rate adjustment, but I think we can do that just on the high usage customers only. And then tower rental, we have water towers that have cell phone antennas and associated things on them, and we're getting more revenue. Our provider has been able to secure more rental revenue on that. So talking about the water rate adjustment, the first option, this is the one that we all, and this is for discussion, and so these numbers can obviously be changed before any sort of approval item takes place, would be to make the adjustment only on high volume users, and high volume users here is defined as people that use more than 6,000 gallons of water a month. The average residential water usage is somewhere around 4,200 gallons of water per month. Now, obviously, some people on average use more than that, particularly if you have a large family, but 4,200 is a system-wide average. Where this is really on the residential side going to cause impacts is people that irrigate. Obviously, if you irrigate, you use a lot more water. We do have irrigation meters, and that can offset your sewer costs, but over 6,000 gallons is not a lot of water to use if you're irrigating a couple times a week. So this is the option. I have highlighted the things that change here. This is the usage rates that would be required if we did this option. So over 6,000 gallons, so the per 1,000 gallon charge between 6,000 and 20,000 gallons would increase 56 cents per 1,000. So if you use 7,000 gallons of water, your bill would go up 56 cents. If you used 9,000 gallons of water, it would go up $1.68. If you use more than 20,000 gallons, which would, unless you were doing an awful lot of irrigating or have a leak, there would be no residential customer that uses 20,000 gallons of water in a month. That goes up 67 cents per 1,000. So I've got some combined bill impacts if you're a water and sewer customer. Talk about low use residential, 2,000 gallons of usage a month, your bill doesn't change. If you use 5,000, so that 4,200, 5,000 is a mid-use residential customer, you don't get a change. If you're a residential customer that uses 15,000 gallons of water, which would be an extremely high usage for a residential customer, your bill would change $5.04. If you're a small restaurant and you're using 40,000 gallons of water a month, you get a $21 increase. A chain restaurant, this would be a sit-down type chain restaurant, not a fast food, but a sit-down restaurant would be changing in about $61 a month. And then a master metered multifamily account that has like an 8-inch master meter at the gate, and then that's distributed to the customers, but the actual property manager has the account, their total bill would increase about $214 on this proposal.
But you don't get a break. I mean, so the 20,000 gallon customer, you don't, I mean, you pay that whether you got 20 REUs or.
That's all usage only,
Yeah, that's usage.
usage only.
That almost seems, I mean, I'm not saying it's not fair, but it almost seems skewed because, you know, of course they're gonna use more if they got, if they're multiple REUs. The REU factor kinda covers a portion of that, if it makes sense.
If you did not do it that way, you'd actually create equity issues with the low water users.
No, I agree, yeah. I mean, I see
So.
that, but.
So there's a second option, if we
How
don't,
much revenue will that generate?
$700,000, give or take.
And how many customers are you expecting it to affect?
We have about 5,000 commercial accounts, so not all commercial accounts are going to use a huge amount of water, but that would probably be the maximum amount of people that would be impacted.
So you're talking
15% of our customers.
Right,
$700,000, so?
give or take, yes, sir.
Okay, let me ask this. The irrigation consumers would be a significant contributor to the consumption revenue here. So I would encourage you, if you hadn't already done it, look at some sensitivities on that. If the pricing signal changes behavior, then it's not gonna be 700,000 a year.
Right.
So just look at that and see if your sensitivity analysis is still going to allow you to gain the revenue necessary to run the business if the pricing signals change behaviors remarkably.
Yes, so the model that we use to look at our rates does include some elasticity of usage, but I can confirm what those factors are. I don't remember off the top of my head.
And I don't really need to know
Right.
the sensitivity analysis. I'm just thinking here that, okay, I got it. Usually what can happen, depending on how much the rate impact is for consumer, behaviors can change.
Sure.
And then that tends to taper off the forecast. This suggested adjustment, in my view, may not do that, may not change behaviors because it looks pretty modest. Okay.
So I have a second option to consider as well. Again, this is why this is on discussion, because we need to have these discussions before we ask for any sort of rate increases. The second portion would be to place a portion of the increased revenue on the base fees, 50 cents per customer. So that'd be 25 cents on the water base, 25 cents on the sewer base. So if you're a combined water and sewer customer, which is the overwhelming majority of our customer base, you get a 50-cent increase in your bill. And then usage adjustment rate would be only changed if you used 20,000 gallons or more in a month. So that would almost be zero residential customers using 20,000 gallons a month. And that 20,000 gallons would almost essentially only impact commercial customers or very high irrigators. So remember, 50 cents on the base, but the usage rates in this endeavor would, for 20,000 and above, would increase about 80 cents a thousand. So you see the residential down there at the bottom, the first three, they change 50 cents. Because if you use less than 20,000 gallons, the only thing your rate changes is 50 cents. The restaurants, you'd see, again, the rates change a little bit there. If you use 40,000 gallons, your bill goes up $16 a month versus, on the other option, $21 a month. The chain restaurants at $65 a month versus $61 a month because that rate is higher, so the more usage, the bigger impact you're going to have. And your multifamily would be around $250 versus around $214. These, based off the model, generate roughly the same amount of revenue. It's not exact, but it's within a couple $1,000s one way or another. So obviously, that's a discussion that we're going to need to have, so we certainly have that at the end. The budgeted expenses that we have here for the year, kind of give you a pie chart on what we're looking at here. Personnel accounts for about a third of the budget. Operating expenses account for about a third of the budget. Reserve transfers, which is, when I say reserve transfers, this is project reserve. We're not just socking money away. This is for doing projects, account for about 23% of the budget. The governing body, y'all cost us a whole 0.62% of the budget, so we're gonna have to, ask y'all to scale that back. Debt service is about 6% of the budget. Interest is about 2.5% of the budget. So the expense highlight, total staff count next year's budget is 154 positions. For your reference, this year's budget is 156 positions. Recent year policy changes are impacting the personnel cost in a positive manner for us. Remember those policy changes were going to a tier 2 on the retirement plan, the way we went to self-funding on the insurance. Those have, and the way we've changed some things on the way we're doing overtime with the VT SCADA and getting rid of some scheduled overtime. Those policy changes are offsetting the potential for raises for employees so that our personnel costs actually decrease for the year in the upcoming budget. I've had a lot of conversations with different commissioners and had some conversations with some other utilities about how they do raises. Obviously, inflationary raises this year are going to be almost impossible to fund just because of the rate of the inflation. So what we looked at, what other utilities have started doing, and this makes a lot of sense, is you do a market adjustment on your pay ranges, and so if you're somebody then falls below what the pay range would be, they get an adjustment to the bottom of the pay range. And then merit raises for every employee based off of the midpoint. You don't get the midpoint. You get a percentage raise based off the midpoint. I'll be happy to go into more detail on that, but that's kind of down in the weeds discussion. But again, that does rate an overall personnel cost decrease, and every employee does get the opportunity to get a raise through that. And it is dependent on your appraisal, but not necessarily dependent on whether you get a 4 or a 5 on your appraisal, which is what it currently does on the merit raises. If you score appropriately, you get the raise as prescribed.
Maybe that'd be a good opportunity at the Human Resources Committee to have a dedicated conversation specifically about salaries and raises, and obviously finance.
Right.
Has an impact.
All right. So by division, systems pumping and wastewater treatment, our two sewer groups are 25 and 23% of the budget, so about 48% of the budget is sewer. On the water side, you see water production and water distribution account for about 14% of the budget. Administration, which is finance, meter reading, IT, is about 7 or 8% of the budget. Finance, which I will say finance group absorbs all of the group insurance costs for everybody in the organization, is about 14% of the budget. And that is about half of the finance budget is the group insurance for the entire organization. Purchasing is about 4%. Planning and construction, what we call engineering, is about 6%.
Andrew, right there, I'm sorry to ask questions along the way, but I feel like it's better waiting this
Sure.
to the end. So purchasing, that's the department, that's not the actual purchases.
No, that's the department. So that's the department. They do purchasing, that's where fleet maintenance, which we don't do internal fleet maintenance, but the fleet manager, and that's where inventory control is handled.
But is the inventory charged there?
No, inventory is charged to the individual accounts that it's charged out to.
Just clarify.
Yes, sir. Office of Director is a little less than 4% of the budget. We just talked with Mr. McGinty. Property and casualty insurance has went up, and that accounts for about 2% of our budget now. And again, governing body, about less than 1% of the budget. So what has increased? Chemicals. So we used chemicals in treatment: oxygen, chlorine, thiosulfate, and then on the water side, chlorine again and phosphates. Chemicals have went up across the board. Talking to other water utilities, we've actually been fortunate with the increases we've seen. Some people have seen 200% increases in chemical cost in the past 18 months. Property insurance, we just heard, has went up. Again, these are all market-driven increases on the chemicals. We're not using more chemicals. We're just having to pay more per unit. And postage, our postage cost did not increase. We split them out separate from the bill printing cost, so it's actually in the postage line item instead of the bill printing line item. So if you kind of scroll down, you see that number jumped way up, but that's just because it's been reallocated. Equipment, parts, and supplies. On the last year's budget and previous year's budget, we had about 8 line items for different assets at the wastewater plants that we were trying to keep track of in the budget. So like aeration basins, clarifiers, digesters, belt presses were all separate line items. and there's really no functionality of that since we put in work orders on all of our assets now. So those are all combined into equipment, parts, and supplies. Again, that's not really an increase, it's just kind of reclassifying. Purchase electrical services, we lost our electrician, so we're having to contract out a lot more electrical work. And electrical cost for equipment is also going up as well for parts at this time. And then, of course, we got a budgeted increase in the repair and replacement reserve because, as we all know, construction costs have went up as we bid these projects out. Some decreases, again, the postage costs are reallocated, so bill printing and mailing went down. Dunbar Creek electricity, we're using less blower capacity because we're only running one aeration basin, and as part of the design build project, we're going to have control over those blowers automatically, so we're budgeting a decrease in electricity costs at that facility because we won't be, for lack of a better term, over aerating our sludge. And then over time, we've seen major reductions in system pumping, administration, and water production that led to a significant reduction in overtime for the year. So here's kind of a snapshot of our expense history for the past 5 years. This does not include capital purchases. Capital purchases are equipment items more than $5,000. When you pull the old data, that all goes in the fixed asset register, and it's no longer available on the old data, so that doesn't include this information. But the green is our operating budget for the year, and you see that has kind of fluctuated a little bit. 2019, the operating budget was our operating expenses was $22,100,000. The budget for next year, so 5 years later, $22,400,000. So about a $360,000 increase over 5 years. The blue is the debt service. You see the debt service dropped off in 2020, after 2020, and we're staying slowly declining on the debt service based off the refunding of our bonds. And then the yellow is our R&R transfers where we do projects out of. I'm especially proud of this. 2019, we were transferring $4 million a year to do projects. The 2023 budget includes just shy of $7.5 million for the project transfer. So one thing that is included in the budget, combination cleaners, vac trucks, if you're more familiar with that terminology, that's how we clean sewer lines. We have 4 of those that we recently completed a capital lease to own program, and those vehicles go through a lot of wear and tear, and our maintenance costs are increasing. So when this was kicked off 6 years ago when we did the first one, essentially the plan was to keep that a recurring thing. Every 5 years when you finish, you trade your vehicles back in, you get new vehicles so that you don't have to absorb the whole cost, because one of these vehicles is $500,000. The current equipment was purchased this way, and maintaining the program increases the capital lease about $11,000 a year, which, considering how much equipment costs have went up, is really not terrible at this point. But we're spending over $20,000 a piece on each one of these trucks, maintaining them at this point. Those trucks, grit just eats through parts on those vehicles as you're sucking that grit into the truck.
I will say on side note, I see y'all's trucks out everywhere preventatively doing stuff. I mean, I think it's awesome.
We jet with those trucks over 300,000 linear feet of pipe a year. So they get worked.
They were all up and down Parkwood.
Right. Yeah, they are working in the 4017 basin, so if you see them out there, they are definitely doing that. Capital requests, we got a lot of capital requests this year. A lot of them are vehicles that are nearing end of life, but I wanted to hit some highlights. Enterprise data center upgrades. Now, I am not the IT professional, so I'm going to ask Commissioner Cook to fill in any blanks here. But our servers are running server 2012, and it is reaching end of life. I believe it's going to be sunset next year.
That's correct.
And so the servers that house all of our financial software and our customer service software and our engineering software, we've got to replace. So that's over $100,000 worth of servers that have to be replaced. We can do the replacement in-house, but we just got to get the servers here. So that will also, we're starting to have some reliability issues at times. Every few weeks, the server has to be rebooted because it goes down, and then we can't take payments for half an hour because we can't get access to the system.
That means it's sending you a warning.
It's sending us a warning, and we'd like to get out ahead of that. A manhole scanner. This is not exciting for people that are not in the industry, but they now have scanners you can lower down off of a CCTV truck into a manhole, and it will profile that manhole for you. So you no longer have to send anybody in with a confined space to do manhole inspections. It's about $100,000 for the purchase, but it'll give us profiles of the manholes so that we know exactly what needs to be rehabbed on these manholes. And it makes inspecting them a much safer and shorter process. And then a sonar sewer main inspector, essentially you put a sonar receiver in one manhole and you go to the other manhole and shoot a sonar wave down and it tells you what percent the line is blocked. So instead of cleaning lines that are 95% open and you're really not getting a tremendous amount of benefit, you shoot this down there first. It takes basically no time. You don't even have to have a vac truck there. And you can tell where to better clean and televise your lines to know where you're having problems with.
Yeah, directionally, I think you're all over this in a very positive way. One thing I just want to reinforce, with new technology and equipment, we've got to have the right training and the right staff to respect the limits of the equipment. So I think this is great to move forward with this. Let's just be sure we get those technicians properly trained and they use the equipment within its design limitations.
The sonar sewer and main inspector, and apologize for that terminology, there is a brand name that is more common for this, but obviously we don't want to classify ourselves as we're going to buy one specific piece of equipment. They, and I have used one of these before, they claim it will cut down what you have to clean in about 10% of lines actually have to be cleaned versus what you're actually doing right now. So if you can imagine cleaning 300,000 feet and that being the 300,000 feet you actually need to clean instead of just cleaning lines because you're going through the system.
How much is this piece of equipment?
I believe it's $50,000 or $60,000. And then refrigerated samplers, that does not sound exciting, but the permits that we have require our samples to be flow-paced samples. So they has to have smart intelligence to look, the PLC in it, reads the meter, what the flow rate is, takes the appropriate sized aliquot for that. Right now what we're doing is going out and hand measuring the sample based off the flow and mixing it together. So these are refrigerated samplers, allow that to occur. A telehandler, right now we have no ability to pull our raw sewage pumps just because of the depth that we have to pull them out of and the weight that those pumps are. We can't get the mixers off the top of our aeration basins or off of our digesters, and we have to rent a crane every time, and we don't have anybody that's a certified crane operator, so we're also paying for the crane operator's time. And usually they come with 4-hour minimums, and they're there for about 30 minutes. So we're paying about 8 times what we should for that, so having a nice telehandler there will allow them to cut that cost out. And then we're replacing about 10 vehicles as well with the fleet replacements. That's, of course, assuming availability of vehicles. But with that, that's the end of the summary of the presentation. So
Help me understand why pages 8 and 18, the numbers don't reconcile. What am I
hang on,
missing there?
let me see what 8 and 18 are.
Expenses by division and then historical expenses.
Oh, the difference in these expenses are the capital things. So those equipment charges, when they get capitalized at the end of the fiscal year, it goes into the fixed asset register and it no longer shows up on the previous budget years. So I can't do an apples to apples comparison for the previous budget years. So the difference in that is, so for example, Office of the Director, the SCADA tech reports to the Office of the Director, his van needs replacing, it's a $35,000 budget item. So the difference in the budget on the 2023 budget on page 8 versus on page 18 should be, if I transferred the information correctly, should be $35,000. And so those are those items listed on page 16 and 17.
Okay, so what about the historical spend then?
The historical does not include capital purchases.
So it doesn't reconcile either. That's the part I was confused about. So like system pumping and maintenance, for example, year-end estimate for 2023 on page 8 is $5,050,000, and on page 18.
Yes, that does not include capital expenses. That's correct.
Which one does then?
The page 18 does not include capital expenses.
Page 8 does?
Page 8 does. It should.
Even in the estimated year-end?
It should.
Okay, so you're estimating it before you remove the capital?
I'm estimating based off expenses year to date, yes. So
So you're taking something that's currently includes capital that has not been pulled out, annualizing, that's how you're getting there?
yes,
Okay.
that is correct.
All right. That seems, I mean, whatever, but okay.
I have a broad comment to offer. I've looked at all of this, studied it a fair amount. Don't give me a test, though. Directionally, I think it's good. What I want to reinforce is be sure that your budget is going to provide the right amount of flexibility you have to execute the business. When we look back 2 years, we've exercised our flexibility remarkably well. And I just want you to be able to be just as successful going through this next year and beyond. So let's just be sure that when we look at the rate adjustment, we look at what our increased costs in the business is going to be, that we have the ability to be flexible and resilient. I'm really pleased over the last few years that, Andrew, you and your team have been able to squeeze out some costs through process changes, efficiencies, taking insourcing work that we had been outsourcing, and all of that is commendable. Just be careful that we don't get so close that we have no flexibility, okay?
Yes, sir.
So Andrew, back to the capital discussion. So the capital is only allocated to the 4 items, because those are only 4 that are different. Is that accurate?
One more time.
So the capital that we just discussed is only allocated in 4 items with system pumping, maintenance, wastewater treatment, water production, and water distribution.
No, sir. If you look on page 16, the division is the first column, 16 and 17. So director has a capital item, admin has 3, planning construction 2, SP&M, wastewater treatment have several, production and distribution all have capital.
And so the part, and I apologize, I'm thick-headed, I'm stuck on here, is year-end estimate lines up perfectly in all the categories except for 4. And that's because of capital, but if.
That's because last year's budget, those 4 groups were the only ones that had
Last
capital.
year, they only 4.
This year's, more groups had capital purchases.
The last, okay, all right, okay. Missed that part a second ago, missed that assumption. So starting on page, I guess what would be 19. Well, back to page 8 real quick. So we got the year-end estimate, which includes some capital that we have not pulled out yet.
That's correct.
So really and truly, that's higher than it's gonna be. It's the worst case, at least, in all the year-end estimates ends, right?
It should be. Yes, sir. I believe I see what you're saying. Yes, sir.
So year-end estimate is as high as it possibly can be, because, not high as it possibly can be, you might have a huge spend, but it's inflated, I guess I should say, because it's inflated by the capital being being annualized.
No, the capital is not annual. I didn't multiply the capital out. I just said the capital would be whatever the POs were for the capital expenses.
Okay, so it's in there, but before you annualize it, you backed all that out. and
Yes,
annualized.
yes. Annualize the operating expenses. The capital is just, we have POs issued. We're waiting on it to show up.
Okay.
So that $70,000 PO for that truck is included in the estimated as 70,000, not 70,000 times an additional 4 months of
Good, okay, I
70,000.
thought you said you annualized it a second ago. That's what.
Well, I did annualize it, but those don't annualize. They're just one number.
Okay.
Yes, I did not
Pull
explain
them
that.
out for you. I got you. Fair enough. So these numbers are accurate then. So year-end estimate is X, and then over here, the increase is what you're going up or down. And I guess the question is, it's great that in the governing body, we're going down 30%. But we're still budgeting for double what we spent last year, or it's projected to spend this year.
That's correct.
I mean, and I guess that's kind of part of the question is why are we projecting such a higher amount than we've spent this year?
In the governing body, the bulk of the expenses in the governing body are legal fees and
We
I will
have
say,
some travel, meals and travel.
meals and travel, but here's what I'll say about legal fees. Our legal fees tend to come in about once every 3 months, and not every month. So the governing body's expenses, just assume they're 3 months behind.
Okay.
That's unfortunate, but that's just the nature of the billing system.
So where I was headed, that office of the director up a little bit, administration's up, almost 13%.
Bulk of that is capital purchases. Something like $158,000 of that increase is capital purchases.
So kind of having that preliminary discussion, just kind of on the summary. Now we go to page 19, which is there is no page 19, but there's page 18 and one after it. So this is what's in those proposed budgets. I think what would be helpful is if we could do the same categorical thing in each of these, not necessarily on page 19, but starting with page 20 maybe, I mean, what did we have there last year and what did we end up spending?
Sure, I can do it.
And it's just, you know, basically had a category close to Commissioner Duncan's point. I mean, in the governing body expenses, you know, we've got, you know, X amount for meals, X amount for education. I don't know that any of us have ever submitted a reimbursement. I never have.
We have people, but I will say there is a bill going through the state legislature right now that will require water and sewer boards to get 8 hours of continuing education for every member.
Okay.
Just giving you a little bit of a preview on that, but
It starts next year, though.
starts next year, so.
You heard that ahead of time.
So just giving you a heads up on that one coming down the line on you.
Okay, but my point is, I'd just be curious to see kind of what what the spending in each area is.
Well, I mean, we can certainly provide that information right here, but I will say those are all available on the financial statements as well.
Okay.
I mean, we can total it up for you, give you a nice comparison, but that, you do have access to that in the financial statements right now.
But just, maybe put them behind this then, so we go. I'd be curious to see
Sure.
kind of how each of these, you know, what the red flags are, because, I mean, to Bob's point, y'all have done, and you know I'm your biggest supporter, y'all have done a fantastic job of, you know, improving efficiency, driving costs down, et cetera. But, you know, ultimately, to your point, I mean, we've got a major human resources crisis coming as a nation. But, I mean, we might have to do some drastic things mid-year. I mean, we might approve this budget today, and not today, but, I mean, we might approve it, you know, the day you ask us to vote on it. And then 6 months later, you know, inflationary, you know, stuff, we've already set the rates for the year, but we might have to, you know, raise wages just to be competitive, to be able to recruit people, retain people. And what I don't want to do is have done that. Once we approve the budget, it is what it is, within reason. And then, you know, we have to make expenses on HR or wherever else. We need to be judicious about these other things. I mean, just because there's a line item for a budget doesn't mean that, you know, the department needs to go spend that amount.
Sure.
They still need to be discretionary on the spending. They still need to make sure that every dollar, I mean, this is a guideline. It's not necessarily, hey, here's you $100,000, go spend it.
Right.
So it's
Check.
I
yeah,
share
it's
your
not a
concern.
check. And a lot of these are big numbers. And I'd be curious to know what we spent in the past on each of these numbers.
Sure.
Because there's some pretty big, I mean, you know, like in administration, I mean, there's $40,000 worth of travel and education. Not saying that's not great to have, but, you know, we have to give $40,000 worth of raises. That $40,000 got to come from somewhere.
I
I'd be curious
share
to
your
know.
concern too about the personnel costs.
Yeah.
And, you know, I know the money's allocated for the whole year and we have a lot of open positions, but that also means that people have to work harder to get work done for people that aren't there. And I do think we are gonna have a bit of a crisis coming with personnel. And, I mean, when our bottom end of our people are paid the same as people that work in fast food restaurants, it's becoming a crisis. Beyond our control, but it is an issue.
Any other comments, questions, or challenges at this point for Andrew's presentation for the budget discussion? Andrew, it's overall very good directionally. I appreciate what you've done. It helps us as a committee to be able to socialize this with our peers. It's good work done without getting down too far into the nuts and bolts. Yes, there are some things that are going to pique our interest, and we're going to want to know some more answers when we get there. But thank you for providing this. Again, what I want to leave you and your team with is be sure we have resiliency built in.
Yeah.
Because it will be difficult to make difficult decisions mid-year. Okay, last item for discussion. Ms. Wilson.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. We have our financial statements as of February the 28th, 2022. First up, we have the balance sheet, and we do have a strong balance sheet. We have some good cash and investments, some good ratios going on. Our first note is our prepaid expenses. Notice they are at $109,000. That is down from our June 30th number. That includes our annual software that usually gets expensed over multiple years, and our unexpired insurance. So as insurance gets approved, hopefully tomorrow, then that number will, do we have it, Janice, on here?
No, as far as what?
The actual financial statements,
Yes,
where are they at on there?
at the end of the.
They're high.
We didn't even pull it out for this meeting, wow. Duh.
Page one. My apologies.
I'm sorry. I didn't even think about it. This is so tiny, my eyes are just killing me on March meetings. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And all the way at the back of it. And how do we get rid of that?
Drag
Here,
it, it'll
here.
take longer spinning, pull it all the way down.
Right there.
And then try this.
Yeah.
There you go.
Thank you for showing me that.
A little higher.
Where you wanna go?
Keep on to the top.
Page one.
Page.
You're almost there.
Start from the beginning.
Start from the beginning.
There we go.
Here we go.
You might wanna zoom in, cause even I can't see that. There we go.
Oh. Carry off my notes, why don't you? So we have our prepaid expenses. That number is at 109,000 as of June the 28th. As we move forward with insurance, that will go into prepaids, and we expensed out 1/12 a month. So that number will increase as of, for March. Fixed assets, 120 million. We did have some fixed assets that fully depreciated, and then we have added 2.6 million, which we will see on our capital project.
Once the project's complete, what point do we start appreciating? 100% complete?
When it's 100%
So
complete,
like Academy Creek done phases, we wait till the whole thing done.
right, till the project itself is closed out.
Also, under current liabilities, we have a new line item there, unearned revenue, $2 million. The ARPA funding that I had originally put as a ARPA revenue needed to be reclassified. It is unearned revenue, and to the point that we use those funds, and then it will be recorded as revenue. I did check with the auditors on that, so it has now been moved to the current liabilities. Page 2, don't really have any specific notes on page 2. Any questions about the balance sheet? Okay, moving on to the summary revenue. Our net operating for fiscal year,
Please scroll down.
oh, sorry, I get looking at this and forget that. My apologies. Let me, here we go. Our net operating revenue is 1.2 million. As of this time in fiscal year 21, that was 1.6. Our water and sewer only for this year, 150. We're over budget, over the projected budget by 150. This time last year, we were under budget by 631,000. Total operating revenue, we're over the projected budget by 732. This time last year, we were under by 120. Again, note at the bottom at the capital fees, we were 1,150,000. Last year, we're kind of averaging where we were last year. We're at 1,157,000. And again, there is no ARPA funding classified there. Any questions about the summary revenue? Moving on to summary of expenses. For fiscal year '22, as of the end of February, we're at $469,000 under budget. This time last year, a little over 1.6 million under budget. Our encumbered funds are 1.163. That's down 150,000 from last month.
We had some trucks show up.
Yes. And of note, under the interest expense column there, we are under budget by 144,000. That is this Series 2021 bonds, the debt expense on that. Any questions on expenses? Moving on to our cash balances. Our bond sinking fund is at 2.1 million. On June 1st, we will have a 2.5 million payment on principal and interest, so we're building up for that. We do make a monthly bond payment of around 250,000 each month. The R&R, 21 million. That still includes the 2 million ARPA funds. On page 6, our investments are at 46 million. That includes short-term and long-term funds. And speaking of investments, if you move to page 7, we have an investment portfolio update. Yes, sir.
Stop for a moment, please.
Yes.
So back up on page 6, so just looking at our capital improvement fees, reserves, and the splost account. We're currently carrying about 1.8 million in the splost, and
Yes.
those projects, Andrew, as I remember, we're going to finish those this spring.
That's correct.
So basically, we're going to be writing those checks right about the end of the fiscal year to close those projects.
That is correct. The last Frost project, the force main down Ogden and all that is scheduled to be completed in June. So we should have that closed out this fiscal year.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay. And each month as we fund the reserve accounts, we'll run a report and determine how much money needs to be drawn down from investments into the cash account to pay those expenses.
Is there possibility we may have a carryover in that expense, or?
In splost,
Yeah.
the expenses will exceed the remaining splost balance, and it will be paid for out of the capital improvement fees from the original project funding. The expenses on the splost account likely will be expended by probably May, based off the average invoice we're getting in for the monthly work.
Okay. And then to go one step further, in terms of any carryover, meaning is it possible we might be invoiced for some of this work after the fiscal year?
Yes, but that likely will be on the capital improvement fee portion of that, not the splost portion.
Okay. Thank you.
And if it is work done in June, but we don't get invoiced to July, we still back that up into June.
Good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions before we move to investments?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. We have an investment portfolio update. So we have each of our portfolios. The group insurance and the splost were added in October of this past year, and they only show short-term dividends. I did a comparison between fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22. At the bottom, we have our year-to-date return, and that was calculated by taking our year-to-date net, which is our total income on gains or losses and interest minus out our fees, and divided that by the beginning market value on 7/1. So there's a comparison where we are from February of 21 and February of 22.
Those red numbers in January really kind of dropped the average.
Yes. So our securities in our investment accounts are held to maturity date, and then those funds are reinvested. Most of those funds are long-term. There are normally short durations, and we're talking, I think, 2 to 3 years. May have been what that duration is. Our normal year yield to maturity is 1.4 to 1.5, and most of those are U.S. Treasury and U.S. agencies. And of course, interest is paid twice a year on these securities. The short-term security, the dividends are used to buy more shares, and they are just reinvested each month. Our two managers from Synovus, Michael Harden and Dan Morgan, have offered to come and speak to the commission at any time you guys wish for that to happen. If you have any questions on our investment portfolio. Any questions before we move on? Okay, moving to our project report. Page 8. Our current year cost is a little over 15 million. That includes our current portion of expenses and the capitalized expenses from as of July 1st. The total ongoing project costs are 33.8 million. We did have 3 projects capitalized during the month of, well, this year. We have our, the meter replacement, the pilot project, we capitalized those expenses. Bergen Woods, project 2007, and project 703. All of those were under the projected budget. The $1.1 million that was on project 703 was reclassified and moved up to project 702. And again, that total was $1,010,159.18. The projects removed, I'm sorry, the 3 projects that were capitalized totaled $2,658,128. When they are finalized, they are removed from the construction in progress total and moved into the fixed asset portion on the balance sheet. Project 2003, the Sea Palm SIP, is wrapping up and should be completed in March. I think it's.
I got the final invoice this afternoon.
And 2027, which is our public safety, should be wrapping up. I think they're waiting on warranty docs for that.
It is.
And again, those expenses are currently being recorded in the other income section, and as we get reimbursed by the county, we move that into the capital project. So our total for 2027, we're showing expenditures of a little over $8,000. That will differ from what you see on the facilities for that, because they are running total cost, whereas we are keeping it with the reimbursement cost. And I think at that time, we will have ask for the county to dedicate.
That's correct.
Those total costs to joint water and sewer. We have a total of $29 million for the complete cost, and that's the budget available after the expenses and any remaining encumbrances on those projects. Any questions?
I have none. I've followed right along with it. I'm good. Anything?
No, nothing.
You had a question a moment ago?
I'll let you go.
Okay.
Thank you, Francis.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Any other business before the committee today?
Not at this time.
Well, like I say, you know, please don't take anything on after challenges. I mean, I don't understand this, but I mean, I really appreciate that, continue to drive efficiency there. I think we're in a much better spot than we've been in the past. And obviously that's, all because of your hard work. I just encourage us to be, like Mr. Dunn said, flexible this year, because we don't know what we'll get into this upcoming year. And it's kind of hard about budget off of historical
letters in that people are, they're increasing costs 20%
Mm.
because of current market conditions.
And that's where,
Right.
I don't want to be dead horse, but I think every department director in this organization needs to understand that, pumps and piping, might have to replace, the same amount of pipe they replaced last year, but at a 20% premium. So somebody else might have to get really, really tight on, who they allow to travel.
Right.
What kind of controllable expenses that they do, because, while we do have a budget, while we will approve the budget, it's not a check, it's a guideline.
Fuel cost is a perfect example.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't have predicted we'd be here. $1.50 over the last just very few months increase in both diesel fuel
Right.
particularly and gasoline. So I have no regrets in that regards because I couldn't pull the equipment I owned if I didn't have that. But that's an example of the resiliency we need to have to be able to deal with those issues that come up and still be successful, meet our customers' reasonable needs, and operate at a level that our customers are willing to pay. Thank you all for your comments. Appreciate what your team is doing, Andrew. We're adjourned for today. Thank you.